All right, I am Mark Niebergall. I work now at Nucleus Security. I started there early December. We do vulnerability management, security scan, analysis, and things. We are hiring like crazy. Full-time remote. Hey, Steve, you did great fit. Based out of Sarasota, Florida. Yeah, really good benefits. That's also another big draw for me. Mind-blowing benefits, super good. 10% of your income straight into retirement for you don't have to retire. Yeah, good. We're talking about developing solid code tonight. Hopefully this is discussion. I want, we can talk about things, we can stop, ask questions, make points, whatever, argue about things. No, you're right, no, you're wrong. Hopefully it's not too opinionated, but we'll cover some principles and stuff as we go through it. Thank you, Entrada, for hosting us. They apologize I forgot the food tonight, but there's pop out there, and they'll do food next time we do that. Nucleus Security, let me use the Zoom account on there as well. So got on there. Hopefully walking out tonight, you understand the 5 solid principles. They'll look at your code and author better code, architect it better. We'll go into the benefits and stuff of why you want to do that. I kind of broke it out into 3 different sections. First, we'll go through what the principles are, kind of explaining, helping understand the difference between the different principles. We'll go into some practical examples when you can actually use it. Hopefully, it spurs some ideas. And my internet connection is unstable apparently. The Wi-Fi here. We'll end with talking about some the benefits of why it's worth the investment in clean architecture. Anyone name the 5 off the top of their head? Probably not. Single responsibility, OpenClosed, Decoupled.
Inversion of control.
Yep, inversion. Yep, we got each here, got them all 5 of them. I'm not sure I can remember all 5 of them all the time. As a kind of an emphasis on this item here. Following these principles promotes good, clean architecture and is the basis of a stable object-oriented platform or system. If you're developing using these principles, you're going to see fewer bugs. It's going to be more stable. It's more mature. It's going to be easier all around. And that's really where these principles came from, was from looking at the object-oriented programming and which principles should be followed when doing object-oriented programming. So there they are: single responsibility, open-closed, Liskov substitution, interface segregation, dependency inversion. I said we'll go into each one, kind of differentiate them out a little bit so that it's understandable what they are. Single responsibility. How many times have we seen a class that does this? Class square, calculate circle area. It's like trying to fit a circle in a square. Yeah, I've seen it so many times. It's a common problem, right? Especially, I feel like the older the code is, the more code smells it has usually. Not always, but generally, I find that a class should really just do one thing. It shouldn't try to do all the things all at once. In this case, we have a square that's calculate the area, length times length. It also has calculate the circle area. How many times do we see the classic class utilities? Uh-oh, who has a class utilities? It should just be a file. Just have global functions, right? Having the a class just do one thing brings many benefits. In this case, if you clean it up, here's a circle that's extending a shape, because if you use the X is Y, so is circle, circle is a shape, which is true, so therefore you can extend using abstract, and it calculates the area. You could have done like an interface to anything, but this is an example of using an abstract, how you break that out, because each shape can have you can calculate the area of the shape, but it's going to be done differently depending on the shape. So in this case, that class now is just doing one thing. It's broken out. We'd have a separate square class that would be able to know how to do all the square things, and it'd be great. So again, should do one thing, should just do it really well, should be focused on that. It shouldn't be off wandering around the weeds doing random stuff unrelated to it. What's been your experience with it?
When I start developing something, I don't know what it's going to be. I will put it into one class and I won't focus on this. But then as soon as I figure out what it's going to be, then I'll start working.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of starting off with putting things in there, but then breaking it off as you get a better idea. I feel like as you work through a project, understand the concepts better, you get a better feel for like your domain-driven design, and how's it going to look, how you're going to break this apart. So as it goes along, it does become easier to know how to separate those.
You build your write your test for your controller, and those are all passing. Now you can say, okay, I'm gonna break this down. And so you start breaking it out, and as long as the test is stuff out, you're good. Probably want to write more tests for the stuff working out, but yeah, that's one of the things that I like.
Yeah, so Derek's example was TDD, if you couldn't hear that on, was joining on. So yeah, TDD is a great example. And a controller is actually a really good example. A controller should just do one thing. It should grab a request and throw it off to the handler, whatever that's going to be. It shouldn't be doing anything else. It should just send it off. So you get a fat controller. TDD is a great example. When you go to write a test for a class, if it's tricky and hard, that class is probably doing too much. That's been my experience. If you're having to throw 20 things into the constructor, mock objects, it's probably doing too much. There might be a better way to break that out. Like a class should just really focus on that one thing to make it nice and clean and better well-architected. You're thinking.
So one thing with single responsibility is that it applies at so many different levels.
Yeah.
It applies at the function level, at the class level, at the namespace level, where you can look at this as more than just a constraint. You can look at it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So like, yeah, and a function could be too much. And if a function should just do one thing, it shouldn't be doing a whole bunch of other things. I've heard some people say the rule of 10 lines for a function. I don't keep strict to that. I think that's pretty hard to do. But if a function becomes hundreds of lines, it's too big usually. There's usually a much better way to do that, to break it apart.
I oftentimes think if you're explaining what the function does to somebody and they're having to say a lot, then you probably get too much.
Yeah.
Or if you never try talking first. Yeah.
If a function has comments of steps inside of it, it's probably doing too much. Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
This can also be, take this to the extreme,
It's a really good, yeah, that's a really good point. It's kind of a good segue into microservices. If you've developed it in a well-architected way, it should be fairly isolated. It shouldn't be coupled with other things. It should be somewhat independent. Yeah. Oh, decoupled code, easier to test, like Eric or Derek hit on. It's called Eric. I missed the D at the front. There's concepts too of different classes, so not everything's just one type. There's all sorts of different types of classes. For example, entity or model, a service, factory, validator, on a form coming in, a validator of some sort, a handler, maybe using middleware, an action for an API or something, controller we talked about, some sort of response, whether it's JSON response or XML or HTML, whatever. There's lots of different types of classes. Here's more. I thought it was a worker, queue, if you have a messaging queue, or if you have a command that has to run an adapter of some sort or a client. But as you're working through classes, think how you can break it apart by those different types of classes and different types of responsibilities, we'll say. Each of these are very distinct in what they do. There's also like abstracts, interface trait, and the new PHP 8 is 8.1 enums, where you have different, you can break it out into different things. Anyone on PHP 8.1, by the way? Sidetrack there. Tom is the personal project.
Well, we just need
Yeah. Very nice. Yeah.
All my libraries,
I was gonna say, because you're using annotations.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying if using annotations, yeah, you can't be seven,
I'm not
just be seven. Oh,
I just don't want to support anybody.
okay.
It's not gonna be-
Oh, I had it backwards. Yes, sir. Yeah.
It's, so all my stuff is tested on
Yeah, it's good. You've started the process of my employment of upgrading, so it's good. All right. Any questions about single responsibility? It's one of there's always things kind of scope creeping in to classes. It's hard to keep them decoupled, broken apart on the separation, but it's very helpful from a maintenance standpoint. I've experienced. Open closed. So example here, you have a pet, and let's say you have a dog that's a pet, and you got to put a leash on it and walk outside. And so you start off with a pet, maybe you just have it so it's feeding it, but all of a sudden you want to have a pet dog, and so you're adding dog things into there. But what if you have a pet snake? You don't want to go walk the snake. That's not going to make sense. Or if you have a pet fish, you probably aren't going to take it for a walk. I don't know, maybe you will. The better way to break that out is let the snake do its own thing. So when you add a different type of pet, you shouldn't have to go and change the abstract, the pet class.
But using the suffix of abstract has been frowned upon. A lot of CS libraries, they flag that.
Not using abstracts?
No,
Or on using abstracts? Oh, I still generally call it an abstract just for clarity, so I understand what it is. It's easier to find them. So like, well, PSR is almost all interfaces. They don't really do abstracts. But they but they do name their interfaces as X interface in the PSRs. Yeah, it's 15 and 17 are like the HTTP request and response or client stuff. And those are interfaces and they're all, oh, the code style. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we haven't gotten to interface segregation. Yeah. Not my mouse. How do you feel about cats? Yeah. Open for extension, closed for modification. You know, if you're going to be extending classes, make it so that anything that's in the parent class should pertain to all the things. You shouldn't be needing to go and change it to add new sub children of some sort. It probably isn't following the X is a Y principle, the concept, if you do have stuff. Any questions about that one? It's kind of a weird one. There, so extend the class instead of altering it. You know, if it makes sense that something's a subset of it or a child of it, you say.
You have very, very few reasons for you to have open that file. It would only be for one type of change, but not to be able to add another configuration. So it's in the OpenClosed, like you need to change it, be able to make new configuration, different types of configuration. That's something that you pull out to where now you set up the file. You really don't have a reason to go in there because it's not just to make it sort of be extended, but like even that refactor to be that. Any file. You don't want to have to open it up.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Configuration coming into play. And yeah, I like to go dig through the abstracts and the stuff in libraries. That's because I want to understand how they work in this behind the scenes, but I'm not going to go change them. That doesn't make sense to do that kind of stuff. Yeah, configuration driven is very helpful to get around some of these kind of problems. Liskov substitution. Is a rubber duck a duck? It's kind of the question that comes up. Can it fly? You know, if you take class rubber duck and tell it, say it extends duck, and all of a sudden it can fly, which is not true. There's a substitution problem there going on. You shouldn't have to alter the parent on there. The covariance that was added in PHP has been very helpful to address that issue. Can't remember if it was 7.4 or if it was 8. What? Well, that's union types. So like, for example, returning the child type of it rather than the parent type of it. Anyways,
oh no, that's okay. That's not. That's,
no, it's
yeah. I know what you're saying now, but I still sure that.
8. Yeah, because it used to be on when return types were first introduced, you had to return that specific type. Right, if it implemented that interface or extended that abstract or whatever, you couldn't return you had to return the exact same if you extended an abstract on that one. Where this covariance allows you to change that one to be the child type when you implement it or extend it or whatever. So it's just, you know, you shouldn't be substituting in things that aren't actually falling into that category. Don't try to shoehorn things in. Is kind of I see that a lot in code, trying to shoehorn things in that don't really make sense in there. Any questions or examples people can think of where they bumped into this Gov one?
I think this is one that's not talked about. But
Yeah.
one of the easier ways to recognize application of it is if you have type up.
Yeah.
Statements and want to call a different method on a similar class. Probably violating the unit class. That type of check implementation.
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea. Good point.
Because in theory, you shouldn't be able to find the base class or the subclass.
Yeah. And I see that applies not just to classes, but also the variables come around too. Where if you undo type of checks on variables, there's probably a problem there. One thing I've actually wondered today, I was working on something, or was it yesterday? Why doesn't PHP have typed local variables? We have gone and typed all the other things. So like right now, in PHP, you can declare a variable locally within a function, but you can't type it. You can't say it's going to be always a certain type. Would that be beneficial? I actually thought about this today. I was turned. This one kind of left me unsettled. I think it'd be beneficial. I think it'd be cool, but
There's a theory. There's a theory that's happening. So that is. You follow that paradigm. There's no need.
there's no.
Type your local variable.
If you don't have variables, there's no need to type them.
Also, there's really the other setting of the single function is only.
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot of weird things going on. Yeah.
Probably why it's not the people who are putting don't know.
Right. Yeah. You do get problems like built-in PHP functions that are returning different types, some of the older stuff.
The only time that I wish, and I'm not sure this is exactly what it's saying, but it's related. It's like if you have a method that returns, like for example, you have a method that you're calling in there while you're calling a model and saying, well, the first method, it does not return, you would say user first. It's not going to, the return type on that first method is not going to be because it's a generic method. So it would be nice if there was a way, other than putting a doc block in the function, to be able to say, this is a
Well, I really like the way Decoupled does it, where you can specify a variable, you can use a variable.
and that's actually not. Yeah. Yeah, anytime you're using TypeScript.
Yeah. Okay. I might take this one up more, a little further than mulling this one over. Same thing how you can't have typed constants on a class. Visibility modifiers, but you can't have a type. Obviously, the type can't change once it's set in the declaration, but you can't go and explicitly just say the type. Yeah, constants have limitations, severe limitations. Steve's like, closed for extension. I mean, open for extension. That's right. Open for extension. Okay. Interface segregation. I saw this example, a similar example. An employee who checks their email, creates a pull request, attends a meeting, ... This is an example of a bad interface because not all employees need to check their email. Not all employees need to create pull requests. Not all, they might need to for their job. I don't think a pilot's going to be creating pull requests. Just like as a developer, I don't particularly like attending meetings. This is an example of an interface that is doing way too much. I like interfaces that are clean, small, simple, and you can always add more interfaces to implementations. But there's a level where if you're getting too many, or it doesn't make sense, it restricts your architecture, it restricts work expanding it out. In this case, it doesn't make sense to have it. So you don't want your class that's implementing employee interface to always always have check email and just have it like throwing an exception because we don't do that kind of stuff. It should be broken out better than that. I found this explanation that's in the references at the end, but many client-specific interfaces are better than one general purpose interface. So the employee one is a good general purpose example, and rather than just a simplified one. Let's keep interfaces simple. Keep them simple, stupid. Yeah, it's supposed to be a contract. It's supposed to define so you know exactly what it's going to do. Shouldn't be doing a whole bunch of things. I don't know. Generally, I find 1, 2, maybe 3 at most functions in the interface is about the max I use generally. Usually they're pretty small. And remember that we have the previous principle of single responsibility. Same thing applies to interfaces. We should just have a single responsibility of that contract of what the interface is going to expect to be implemented. We were just talking about this a minute ago. Most PHP-Fig PSRs. Did you know there's a PER now? PER, by the way? A PER? So the coding style PSR has not technically superseded yet, but a PER was just, I don't think if it's published yet. Anyways, it's on GitHub now, but it's supposed to be a live, it's evolving. So the problem with the PSRs right now is that once they're set, they can't go back and change them. But then PHP 8 came by, and now we have Tom's favorite annotations. I know. Giving you a hard time on that one. Enums though came up. There's no PSR covering enums, and they can't make a PSR. And they have to create a whole new PSR in order to get enums and other stuff covered. And so the direction was to go with a living recommendation rather than standard that's set in stone and can never be changed. They could version it, yep. That is it is already a version of, sorry, it's a PSR number per se, but yeah, they could have versioned it. -2. Yeah. I mentioned earlier PSR 15 and 17 with handlers and clients. There's the caching one, there's factories, there's logging. Vast majority, I think all of them that are framework interop items are interfaces. There's of course the, how do you auto load and how do you, it's your coding style stuff that more people are familiar with, but there's also the documentation one, PSR 5, which has been revived recently, is in the works again. We'll see if it ever finishes. It's like one of the oldest ones. Still in draft mode. Any questions, comments about interfaces? Dependency inversion. I couldn't decide between Hotmail and AOL. So let's say you have a Hotmail client, and you go and write all this stuff, and then it becomes obsolete. And then you have to go change your code, and that stings. So making it, in this case, we go and change it. It's just an email client, right? And we know that the email client that needs to send email. We don't need to go abstract it out, work it out so that you don't have to go change all your code just because you replaced something. Previous project I had, we had a faxing capabilities. And after some fun technical arguments, my idea won out. We basically had a wrap around the service, the faxing service. Lo and behold, a couple of years later, we had to replace the integration we had with a different fax provider, and it was a simple swapping out the factory, right? So you just get the other fax service in, and you're done. You don't have to go and change all the 100 places in code. It's fixed for you. So it's a good idea, especially things I find like anything that's reaching out externally. Databases is a great example. You're not going to go write. Hopefully, you're not going to go write something specific for a specific database engine, like naming your variable MySQL adapter, or of course, maybe it's just a DB adapter, right? Or a file thing, or HTML.
Because this class isn't instantiating it. It's not going through and saying, I know the things that I need. I'm just going to create it myself. It's a user service. I'm going to generate a new Hotmail email client. I'm going to create a new user with dependency version. It's, hey, here are the pieces that you need to do things. You don't have to go collect them. So it's not car assembly yourself. It's a car, here's an engine, here's a transmission, here's this. You don't have to, you know what to do with these, but you don't know how to do them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a good clarity fix on that one.
But I still think that's bad code.
Yes, it is still bad code. Yeah, that's a good example with the car.
So like that new email message, right? Like that's something, and this is really good example. But that's something where if you have this information on the user already, you could have created the email message somewhere else.
Yeah.
And pass the message in instead of the user, right? Or something. User had a message, and so it's not having to do a new email message and then they set the email address like that. It wouldn't have to know those things. New is really kind of the tip off that maybe there's something that someone on the call, control, right? Like it's that thing, but that method has assumed control of, I will create an email message. And now you don't have any
Yeah.
control over, you know, the message part. That's actually what you want to control over this part.
Right.
And, if you pass that in and it adheres to an interface, like a message interface, then it might not be just email. But, it could be, well, it could be a line email, it could be a plain text email, it could be, you know, any of those.
That's a good example.
This is another one where testing helps, because if you decide you want to lock out email message, good luck.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if you're injecting email message, or if you're using dependency that allows you that.
Yeah,
There's a reason why they call it simple. Never.
yeah, anytime you're newing up a thing, I would say maybe other than an entity, when it's in the right spot, it's a code smell. So that's what factories are for. If it's not, if it's not in a factory, there we go. That's a better way to say it. You know, the factory is the only time you should be getting newing up services or whatever. Yeah, as Eric pointed out, I did dependency inject all my things all the time. So seeing a new within a function is weird, because it shouldn't be there vast majority of the time. Because then you can't test it. There's no way to test it. And yeah, this one should have gone farther with the message. I'll clean that for the next feature. Use interface and abstract rather than concrete classes. We said on that a lot. A big part of it is code reuse comes into play. I think we've talked about this one. Practical examples. One example, this is an entity or model implementing a couple different interfaces. This would be an example of breaking it apart so that, you know, if you're going to do something like this, you'd have multiple interfaces rather than just one. Because maybe you don't always want to hydrate it, maybe you don't want it to exchange array or two array or whatever nomenclature you're familiar with, whatever framework you're used to, whatever terminology they use. This is an example of an audit. That's a middleware stack layer, where it's using the PSR server request interface and request handler interface, and returns a response interface. It just does a couple of quick things and responds with the response. This is an example of interface segregation going on. So you're not combining it too much. You're not having all these things mixed together. It's using restricted promotion to inject the audit service because you should be doing up the audit service and so on. Other examples you think of? Especially think about, you know, the projects you're working on, the code base you're looking at. How can you apply these principles in those code bases? There's kind of the rule, if you copy and paste it once, you start questioning if you do it again, you really should make sure you don't do that again. Make it reusable using these best practices rather than copy and pasting over and over again.
But I think it's also practical about it. So
yeah,
when you say practical example, I read that as, hey, this is a real world example. But I think there's also a practicality that needs to be in place. If you go back to that, like hydrate and two array, both of those technically may violate the OpenClosed principle if the user all of a sudden gets a new action. There's new actions that you want to have with this user. Does anybody really care that it violates that? Because in order to do sort of like the dynamic programming that would be necessary to make this truly closed for modification, probably not worth it.
Yeah, it's a good argument.
And so you can recognize that this may not be fully, and that's okay, because if it doesn't change, it just doesn't. But if it's changing, like if you start adding, like every week, somebody's like, hey, user's got another action, user's got another action.
Yeah.
It's like, we've got to fix the open closed issue. And so I think that any of these principles taken to an extreme can really lead to a lot of wood spinning
Mhm.
and not much.
Yeah.
And so like even like, I preach these to my developers all the time. It's like this is something that I do all the time, but I also try to preach it.
Yeah.
And I know that we're talking about PHP when we did, but I really hope that people understand these solid principles. I know they're for OO, but they work for functional. Like the principles still apply. You just have to look at it just a little bit. But they really do still apply. Or you can, even if it doesn't give you a class or JavaScript doesn't give you a type, you can still code the same way.
Yeah.
And gain the same benefits.
Yeah. That's a really good point. This doesn't just apply to PHP. It's not just to classes.
Or even the object-oriented
Yeah.
program.
I saw an example of it was kind of, I went to American Chicago, and there was this one of the speakers there. He's a well-known guy now. Like kind of a pioneer, guy.
Yeah.
And he gets up and he starts talking about like frameworks and how like basically he was like, you should not be able to look at your code and know what framework you're using. And I was like, okay. And his thought is that you should be able to swap out any framework you want or any other framework you want, and your system will still work, right? And I'm just sitting there like, that kind of defeats the purpose of it. At least most of the frameworks that are out there, the ones I work with. So then, right after I got back, I started looking at some code. There was a guy that got at the company I was working at the time. There was a guy there that was a big fan of that and was trying to write all this code so that he could use Eloquent but be able to swap out any other or he wanted to. And I was just like, yeah, I thought you would like that. And it technically worked, but it was such a pain in the butt that nobody wanted to look at it.
Yeah.
Use it. And so it's like, that was, to me, that was a case of, sure, you can swap out the ORM. Do you need to? Probably not. And is it worth the pain that you're putting all the other developers through to do that? Pretty much no.
Swapped out Elasticsearch for Search, and it took like 2 months.
Sure.
And it wasn't a problem.
Well, and especially if you have people who are written the connectors and that kind of thing. Like if you're working with Laravel, yeah, that's super easy because all the packages are there to be able to do it, and all you gotta do is say use this instead of this. Then you because the work has been done to meet that cost.
Basically, what makes that possible is when you like, it's when we start to see. Which is exactly.
Right,
Yeah,
I mean, it's already been started.
right.
wrapping the wrapper.
So that at some point.
And at some point, you think that the abstraction becomes.
You know that you really need to do this. Anything that can be valued, it's what WordPress is based on. So the WordPress is a database inside of a database. And you can create a database inside of a WordPress database. It works on that.
We agree that that's not good.
Yeah. Just make sure.
Yeah. There's-
What if you put annotations inside of?
I think Tom should really have annotations in his. I think there's a very good argument to not over architect things. As H was initially hitting on, is you gotta be practical with it.
At some point, you gotta do a job.
Yes, and if you, I've seen teams, I've experienced that where they take over architecting to an extreme and nothing gets done. I don't think you can perfectly architect something from the beginning. It's an evolving being. It's a living, a constantly changing code base architecture, and so you can't make it perfect. You're not going to get it perfect. You have to be somewhat practical with it to make some good progress. But there's benefits to doing it clean too. So it's kind of that, you got to pull in what you can. Mulling it over, I feel like it promotes, following solid promotes these other best practices. From domain-driven design to don't repeat yourself. Keep it simple, stupid. The Agni ain't gonna need that. Don't build it if you don't have it yet. And object-oriented programming, which is a little outlier, of course, in that list, but it's a different thing. But generally, if you're following solid, it's going to help promote these other best practices as well. To me, it's kind of a foundational first thing you should have in place. Best part about code reuse is that you can write fewer tests. If you're having to write, copy and paste a test over and over again, like change one thing, it's probably a problem. You're doing something again and again that you can abstract out, test it once, not have to write more tests for it again. A lot less maintenance, of course, as your code base size shrinks rather than grows. As you follow the principles, it's easier to maintain and add things to it. A project I worked on previously, I watched it go from the startup phase to maturing and stable phase. Initially, the code was very smelly. At the end, the code was very clean. The number of bugs at the very beginning was very high, and the bugs at the very end was very low, which would naturally follow. As the code architecture improves, fewer bugs are coming in, the code becomes less brittle. It's better overall for developer. Everybody's happy. Yay, you have hot fixes on a Friday afternoon. Tom, you think of something? Oh, no, you're deep in thought or something. No, you're good. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Poor guy. Decoupling your code. Code that's tightly coupled is really hard to work with. It's a pain to write tests for after the fact. So it's easier architecture to cleaner, much easier to write unit tests. I love unit tests. I love writing tests for all this stuff. But it's very hard if the code is not architected well. Code's easier to read. It's easier to write it. You're moving faster along. Sometimes it comes time to upgrade a package. It's going to be a lot easier to upgrade that, especially if things have changed inside of it, like framework versions. So working on right now. easier to swap out third-party providers. For example, being worried about the faxing services, there's lots of other different things in that realm. So you get to spend more time creating features, less time writing bugs. You spend less time debugging things and tracking down problems. With that, your team velocity is going to improve. You're going to provide more value to the customers. It's going to be more beneficial for the business as a whole. So many good benefits. It just takes that discipline, that initial effort up front. Improve scalability. You can add new tables and columns easier. It's maybe not from the database side. We already set up. If you can, if you want to expand on domains and logic areas, it's easier to reuse some of the code and whatnot. For me, one of the biggest benefits is confidence in what I'm writing and authoring as a developer. As I implement these practices, I know that I'm deploying, releasing good code. It's I know it's solid. It's going to work. It's not going to, the QA team's not going to kick it back. It's going to be functional. Just got a test on it and all kinds of stuff. Just the higher confidence overall in deliverables. What other benefits you see?
We did talk about teams.
Yeah, the teamwork on it. And if everybody, yeah, it's good to have everybody in on the idea as well. It's easier to work together on a team that's melded well in the team.
Well, and you brought up microservices. And while this is a concept, it's similar. This can help with if you have multiple teams and one team and one if your code is tightly coupled, it's going to be really hard to do that without
Yeah.
Whereas if you have, if they're not tightly coupled,
Yeah. Cross teams working on the same project. Because merging is a lot easier if it's not all coupled up tight. Yeah, there's definitely growing pains too as you go from bad architecture to good architecture. It's inevitable, but it's worth the effort. Quick review again. There's the acronyms. That's all I really have for tonight. Any questions? Other discussion points? Anyone online have questions? Oh, there's multiple chat rooms. Of course, I didn't even see it. Yep, so we didn't have food, unfortunately. No questions there. There's 6 of us here. So pre-COVID, we were 15 or so, 10, 15, 20, up to 20, 20. We had pizza. Yeah, I know. Yeah, different topics. And with COVID, it's of course set us back quite a ways. Trying to figure out getting sponsors has been a little tricky too. I haven't gone to conferences in forever to bring back swag, no offense to stuff either. Oh yeah. You're using PHP Storm now?
No, I got a new laptop. It's an art architecture, right?
Yeah.
So I can't run Windows XP anymore.
It's so rough not being able to run Windows stuff. Oh, it's too bad.
I used that program for 25 years. I could do that. That's better than doing it.
Wow. Okay. That's it. Thanks everyone for coming. There's a little bit about me. Yay. Oh, what have I been doing the last few months? Had knee surgery because I torn meniscus. That was fun. Couldn't run for like a year, over a year. I started running again. I've been biking a lot, actually. I even run a couple bike rides earlier this week, and then it got cold. Yeah. Good times.